In a retirement home in Albuquerque, New Mexico, an explosion was detonated by the wheelchair-bound Hector Salamanca. The explosion killed Hector himself and 2 other men, bodyguard Tyrus Kitt and entrepreneur and philanthropist Gustavo Fring. Gus was highly valued in the community and had made many positive contributions. However, following his death, the DEA investigated his business and uncovered the secret that he was a major drug kingpin with the second most powerful drug organization in United States history. It turns out he'd created an image to manipulate and charm everyone the whole time, and he'd been responsible for the death and torture of many people. A man of pure evil underneath a masquerade of virtue.
I had him out to my house.
A wolf in sheep's clothing.
That whole night we were laughing, telling stories, drinking wine.
And what I want to do in this investigation is break down his dark psychology and figure out how a man could be so evil, and how he could do it all without raising any suspicion from the law.
And he's somebody else completely.
Across the American Southwest resided the locations of 14 Los Pollos Hermanos restaurants, a fried chicken chain that was highly rated by the people who ate there. It wasn't just the food quality that made it great, but the franchise owner, Gustavo Fring, was extremely friendly and accommodating to his customers.
I must apologize. If I had seen you come in, there would have been no question of accepting your money. In the future, please feel free to ask for me. A DEA hero should never have to pay for a meal at Pollos Hermanos.
No kidding? Well, I'll take you up on that for sure.
His restaurants weren't his only contributions to the community. The DEA were up against a rising increase in drug-related crimes, so Gustavo became a sponsor of a fun run they hosted, donating a large sum of money for resources to hopefully help create a safer environment. He was also on the board of a hospital, he funds a school out in Mexico, and he donates money to youth development in Albuquerque.
Oh, Gustavo, we can't thank you enough for being such a friend to youth development.
It's not only me. Every Pollos Hermanos employee is committed to giving these young people the opportunity to reach their fullest potential.
Can you say more about why you chose this organization?
I think of the guidance that I had as a child. If we can make an impact early, we not only help the children, but we help the world.
He would presumably use his profits from Los Pollos Hermanos to fund his philanthropic generosity. On the production side of the company, the ingredients would be shipped from Mexico in Los Pollos Hermanos delivery trucks to the factory farm in Albuquerque, a location that becomes relevant due to a dark irony, as it's the same place as Gustavo Fring's first on-screen murder. The victim is a young man named Arturo Colon. He and his partner Nacho were walking from a drug deal they just carried out, before Gus walks up behind him, puts a plastic bag on his head, and slams him on his car, while his partner Nacho is held at gunpoint by Gus's henchman Victor. Gus zip ties the bag around Arturo's neck, and he and Victor zip tie his hands and legs to prevent him from escaping. Arturo is then left to suffocate to death, whilst Gus watches his soul slowly escape his body. He lets Nacho live, but tells him,
"From now on, you are mine."
Implying Nacho will now work for Gus without any choice or say in the matter. Arturo and Nacho worked for a man named Hector Salamanca, a man that Gus had a deep hatred for. Gustavo Fring claims to originally be from Chile and proclaims he was raised in poverty and had to develop an early entrepreneurial spirit.
We were always hungry. There was a Lucuma tree. When I was 7, I became fixated on it. I watered it, tended to it. It took a long time, but the buds grew into green fruit. And then I began taking it to the village to sell.
At some point later down the line, he met Maximino Arciniega, who also grew up in poverty in the Santiago slums. The two became extremely close to one another and started a romantic relationship. Gus paid for Max's education in chemistry at the Universidad de Santiago de Chile, then the two of them founded their company, Los Pollos Hermanos, which is Spanish for the Chicken Brothers. Max was the chef and Gus managed the business operations. They then moved to Mexico to open up a chain of Los Pollos Hermanos restaurants, but were actually using them as a front and cover to secretly cook and distribute crystal meth. They wanted more and thought that joining the Mexican cartel and convincing them to sell meth would be a prosperous venture. But to get the attention of the head of the cartel, Don Eladio, they gave samples of their meth to cartel workers to bring to Eladio. This method indeed got them a meeting, able to speak with Eladio alongside his capos Juan Bolsa and Hector Salamanca. Gus and Max pitched themselves well, but Don Eladio thought meth was just poor man's cocaine and it didn't have much money in it. But more importantly, he found their methods of obtaining the meeting manipulative and disrespectful.
¿Por qué tengo que hacer negocio con un hombre que me falta respeto, tratando de negocios bajo mis narices, sin pedirme permiso a mí, y que me manipula para hacer esta reunión en frente de mis hombres?
Whilst Max tries to defend Gus's actions, labeling them as an honest mistake, Hector shoots Max in his head at point-blank range, killing him instantly. Gus immediately feels a rage but is pinned to the ground by Juan Bolsa, made to watch the dead body of his lover. Eladio tells Gus,
La única razón por la cual tú estás vivo y él no es porque yo sé quién eres tú.
Gus was broken. He and Max had everything together, and now it had been taken from him because of these men. Gus would then devote the rest of his life to getting revenge. Instead of getting rid of Gus, the cartel decided to use him. As he opened up Los Pollos Hermanos restaurants in the US, and with drug enforcement increasing, his production system with the delivery trucks proved an effective transportation method to smuggle the cocaine from Mexico to the US undetected and with minimal risk. Despite putting on a smiling face for his bosses, Gus truly hated all three of them. However, directly attacking them would be suicide due to them being major players in the cartel. His plan instead was to build his own empire in private and wait for an opportunity of revenge that avoids suspicion. On his path to becoming a drug kingpin, Gus opposed to hiding in the shadows to avoid capture. Instead, he chose to hide in plain sight. But getting away with all of this wasn't an easy feat. It required the ability to manipulate and it required the ability to charm. And Gus had those qualities and effortlessly charmed and manipulated customers, staff, police, and anyone else he needed to. He created a character he could turn into in a split second and put his utmost effort into ensuring this character never faltered. No one could know how dark he really was behind the smile. This obsession with maintaining an image may have caused Gus to develop obsessive compulsive disorder, more commonly abbreviated to OCD, as well as strong hints of paranoia. When in his character, he's always seen making minor adjustments, such as making sure his tie is always straightened, his clothes never creased, his appearance always perfect. Of course, it's not a mental condition to be a well-presented person, but my belief is that when these areas of perfection are satisfied, he worries that someone will notice his unprofessionalism and get a step closer to uncovering his fraudulent character. This would all be far from reality and no one would notice, but for Gus to eventually exact revenge on the cartel, everything had to be perfect and he couldn't be caught. In terms of OCD criteria in the DSM-5, it's hard to know if he has these obsessions as he never openly mentions them. But in terms of his compulsions, his tie fixing and clothes straightening antics are definitely repetitive and seem to be done in an attempt to prevent some dreaded event or situation. However, these behaviors or mental acts are not connected in a realistic way with what they are designed to neutralize or prevent, or are clearly excessive in Gus's case. In further attempt to protect himself, he hired henchmen, including Mike Ehrmantraut, Tyrus Kitt, and Victor. He had these men do the dirty work for him to separate him from his actions. Gus had a hard time being under Hector, facing verbal abuse, slight bullying, but Gus still remained calm, even though this was the same man that pulled the trigger when killing Max.
I am the cartel, and from now on, you are my mule. You are going to bring my product north.
May I ask, did Don Eladio approve this?
I approve this.
However, Gus ran into good luck. Under Hector, one of his henchmen, Nacho, feared him so much that he swapped out his nitroglycerin pills for lookalike capsules containing ibuprofen, as Hector frequently had heart strains which his pills would then fix. So during a meeting between Gus, Juan Bolsa, and Hector, he became angered, which caused his heart to strain, and as normal procedure he took his meds, but this time to no avail.
Hector, this isn't personal.
It is! It is personal!
He suffered a stroke and was hospitalized, and Gus saw this as a perfect chance to start his revenge on Hector. Back in Chile, when Kid Gus was selling Lucuma to the people in his neighborhood, he encountered a problem. A coati, a small animal found in South America, had found his tree and eaten the fruit from it. The fruit the tree bared was Gus's happiness, his finance source, and something he took pride in, and it had been ruined. So he set up a snare trap to capture the coati. It escaped the snare with a broken leg, but Gus eventually caught it. His own words paint a dark picture.
I caught it. It fought me, but I was stronger. The merciful thing would have been to kill it. I kept it. It lived for quite some time.
From mine and many others' perspectives, it's assumed Gus tortured the animal until it eventually died. At the very least, he let it suffer with a broken leg, or he let it starve to death. But there's a possibility Gus inflicted even more harm onto it. This would show that even before the murder of his lover, Gus had the potential to carry out evil, and his actions could class him as a sadist. While sadistic personality disorder has been removed from the newer editions of the DSM, many still recognize it as a legitimate condition. Criteria for the condition was listed in the DSM-3R as a pervasive pattern of at least 4 of the following, which had emerged by adolescence. With only his coati story to go off, Gus did use unusually harsh treatment and discipline towards the coati under his control, and by the way he narrates his story, we could assume he got some amusement from witnessing the physical pain. This might also suggest fascination with violence, weapons and torture if that is indeed what he did. Although not clear if this happened by adolescence, using intimidation and terror to get others to comply is definitely something he does later in life. I would definitely label Gus as a sadist, and his manipulative tendencies and charm allowed him to keep it unseen, and no one knew what he was truly capable of. So just like with the coati, the merciful thing to do that would satisfy his need for revenge on Hector would be to just let him die, or to even ensure he dies there and then. However, Gus does something worse. He pays to get one of the best doctors in the state to treat Hector, but only to the point of regaining some of his mechanisms. When the doctor shows footage of Hector's recovery, Gus realizes Hector is still lucid, just with limited mobility. Gus can't contain his sadistic grin, as in his mind, he plots the torture he could carry out. The doctor states more progress can still be done, but Gus of course opts to leave things how they are.
I've kept you from your work long enough.
Oh.
It is time to delegate Mr. Salamanca's care. His recovery has been remarkable, and my gratitude to you is beyond words.
Are you sure? Hector's progress is very promising. With sustained, intensive care, he may eventually learn how to talk and even walk again.
Perhaps we should temper our expectations.
He leaves him wheelchair bound, unable to speak, with strained upper body mobility instead, for the rest of his life. Hector was restricted to using a bell to communicate, and made to reside in a retirement home, and Gus had ensured a life of torture for Hector, and he took pleasure in doing so. He took pleasure in the control he had over Hector's fate. Whether he lived or died was up to him. How much he had to struggle, again, was up to him, and knowing Hector was suffering excited Gus and the sadism within. It was after this he killed Arturo by suffocating him, which itself is a sadistic way to take someone's life. Now with one of his enemies taken care of, he wanted to control his own fate by starting his plan to separate himself from the cartel. If Gus could manufacture his own high-quality crystal meth in an underground super lab in Albuquerque, he could massively increase his own wealth, build his empire, and be more in control, gaining independence from the cartel. That was his exact plan. He made contact with a German engineer named Werner Ziegler, who would bring his men underground, underneath an industrial laundromat, and start construction on the lab.
So, it's impossible?
Dangerous, difficult, and very, very expensive. Not quite impossible.
However, months into the production of the super lab, a problem occurred. Werner had escaped to try and see his wife, but didn't get to before he was caught by Gus's henchman Mike. The super lab was extremely confidential, and any risk to it being exposed could cause the cartel to see Gus's plan and kill him. So Gus didn't hesitate at all to order Mike to kill Werner.
Is there no other way, truly?
And this adds to the list of victims Gus has taken the life of. However, Werner's escape had caught the attention of Lalo Salamanca, the nephew of Hector, who tried to follow as closely as he could, becoming suspicious of Gus.
A man was working for me on the legitimate side of my business. Ziegler became aware of our other activities, and he stole 2 keys of product. I replaced the stolen product with methamphetamine I purchased locally. some of this inferior product went to your organization. And for that, I must apologize.
However, Lalo knew Gus was lying, and Gus knew that Lalo being suspicious would be an issue, so he once more saw murder as the solution. After Lalo ran into trouble with the police, he fled to stay at a family home in Mexico. Gus saw this as an opportunity to strike, and hitmen were sent to the house to assassinate Lalo. Remember when Gus killed Arturo and told Nacho that he is Gus's to use? From then on, Gus used Nacho to gain intel on the Salamancas and get steps ahead, all at Nacho's risk. He then used Nacho's association to the Salamancas to assist the assassination attempt. Nacho was at the house in Mexico, and from Gus's instructions, he left the back door open for the hitmen to enter as it was highly protected. It gets reported back to Gus that everyone in the house, including Lalo's cook, his gardener, his guards, a 17-year-old boy, and Lalo himself were all murdered. He'd also ensured things were never tied back to him, and money was put on the head of Nacho by the Salamancas, and a manhunt was started by twins Leonel and Marco Salamanca, who were cousins of Lalo. Ever since gaining control over Nacho, Gus revealed his complete lack of empathy, constantly holding a symbolic gun to the head of Nacho's dad, who was completely innocent and an honest man.
No. What are we doing?
Hey, wait! Doing this! Hey, why is he doing this? I did everything! Wait!
Okay, I get it. Just tell me what you want me to do.
Gus heavily implied that if Nacho messed up at all or didn't do as he was told, his dad would be murdered, and it showed that he truly doesn't have any remorse. A trait that, along with his callousness, his ability to charm and manipulate, and his criminality, would perhaps point towards him being a high-functioning psychopath. These are the 20 criteria on Hare's psychopathy checklist revised, and each of these items are scored on a 3-point scale of 0 to 2, indicating the certainty of the presence of the criteria. For someone to be considered a psychopath, they would have to score at least 25 out of a possible 40. After my assessment of Gustavo Fring, he only scores 11, not even close to qualifying. However, I found something interesting. When I read up on the work of Robert Hare, arguably the biggest pioneer in the realm of psychopathy research, he split the original criteria into 2 categories of emotional interpersonal and social deviance. When I categorize the revised criteria this way, we see that Gus actually displays 6 of 7 of the emotional interpersonal criteria, but he only displays 1 out of the 13 on the social deviance side. The easiest way I can describe the difference between the 2 categories is the person versus the lifestyle. Gus has the personal characteristics of a psychopath, but doesn't live the lifestyle of one, and that might be an even more dangerous combination. When you look at the traits on the social deviance side, Gus actually benefits by not having them, but by still having the personality of a psychopath, he can carry out what needs to be done without hesitation, no matter how immoral. This, along with sadism, meant that Gus was truly capable of any evil whilst having a good chance of getting away with it. Someone in the real world just like this was Dennis Rader, famously known as BTK. Rader held down normal jobs, had a wife and 2 kids, and appeared a regular everyday citizen, but was behind the murders and tortures of 10 people over a span of 3 decades. And he didn't get caught until more than 10 years after his most recent murder, and he only got caught due to the advancements in DNA technology. He was also notorious for a sadistic nature, and as a child, he allegedly developed violent sexual fantasies that involved bondage after killing cats and dogs by hanging and strangling them. He enjoyed watching animals struggle until they died, which may have been a similar abnormal trait to Gus with the Kawati. The ability to be so evil but also so good at getting away with it is what makes Gus a serious threat to Nacho, who has become submissive and does whatever Gus tells him to. Even Mike, who is still a bad person but has more of a moral compass than Gus, tells him that they should let Nacho be.
Nacho Varga. He wants out. He's done everything we ask. He held up his end. I think it's time we cut him loose.
I see no reason to give up an asset. Varga stays. Better to control the opposition without their knowledge.
You have a gun to his father's head. That doesn't sit with me.
A dog who bites every owner he's had can only be disciplined with a firm hand or put down.
This further shows how Gus lusts for control and tries to keep the control over people however he can, either with money, torture, or threats. However, something Gus didn't consider after the assassination attempt was that if Nacho gets caught and they make him talk, he could give up Gus and the cartel would be after him. Gus saw this as another opportunity to use Nacho's dad for compliance.
El padre de Varga. Tráelo aquí.
No. You're not doing that.
Just say the word.
Nacho then calls Mike and asks to speak to Gus, and after stating that his only concern is protecting his dad and is willing to give himself up to Gus in exchange for his dad's safety, they come to an agreement. He's picked up by Gus's men, he's told to tell a fake story to the Salamancas that would state he was paid off by another gang to help assassinate Lalo and in turn save Gus's skin. He did exactly that, followed by shooting himself in the head before the Salamancas could kill him, bringing forth another death at the hands of Gustavo Fring. But his problem was far from solved, because Lalo Salamanca was in fact not dead. The assassination attempt failed, and everyone except Lalo had been killed, and he was now coming for Gus. Gus experiences genuine fear as Lalo is someone he can't control. He has no idea at all where he is. Lalo was in fact hiding in the sewers, spying on Gus, and figuring out the secret Gus was hiding. Gus increased all of his security measures and had men working 18-hour shifts of surveillance. He eventually went back to his laundromat where the super lab is, assuming safety. However, Lalo was there and kills Gus's men and wounds Gus. He starts to film him at gunpoint and forces him to show the super lab so he could expose him to the cartel. Luckily, Gus had knowledge of a gun he planted in the lab and managed to shut off the lights and shoot in Lalo's direction. When the lights came back on, he found Lalo with a gunshot wound to the throat, smiling as he bled to death. With Lalo being out the picture, Gus had clear headway to finish construction of the super lab and build his crystal meth business over the next half a decade. A piece of the puzzle Gus seemed to be missing was a product superior to anything on the market. He had the lab, the transportation routes, but the addictiveness of the product would be what truly leads to more money. And luckily, through an association of Mike, who had an association with dirty lawyer Saul Goodman, Gus was put into contact with Walter White, a chemistry teacher turned meth cook by the street name of Heisenberg, who could cook meth to almost 100% purity. And he had a tried and tested product that was highly addictive.
Are you familiar with my product?
I've been told it's excellent.
It is impeccable. It is the purest, most chemically sound product on the market anywhere. You could charge twice the current rate for what I provide, and your customers would pay it, hands down.
Walter's cooking and Gus's production would make tens of millions, so Gus hired Walter alongside his assistant Jesse Pinkman. However, this work wasn't easy to come by. Walter was an extremely multi-complex man that had experienced moral warfare, wanting to work with Gus one week and then saying he's not a criminal the next and leaving the job. But Gus could see that Walter had an ego and tried to charm him into continuing the work. He knew that Walt needed to take care of his family, so Gus, although having no family of his own, gave him a speech that he thought would resonate.
When you have children, you always have family. And a man provides. And he does it even when he's not appreciated or respected or even loved. He simply bears up. And he does it because he's a man.
This could be Gus's genuine opinion, but it seems more likely that he can see Walt questioning his own integrity, his morals and masculinity, and chooses to feed Walter words of advice that fit Gus's own narrative, hoping Walter will continue to work for him, allowing him to keep control. He also tries to further manipulate by making Walter relate to him when he invites him to his house. Gus doesn't have any children, but he spews children's toys across the floor for Walter to see, and when cooking dinner, he states,
"Kids won't eat it, but you know how it is."
This slight warp in perspective, to make Walter see Gus as a family man, would increase the chance for Walter to see himself in Gus, which makes him easier to control. Another event had gone on between Walter and Tuco Salamanca, another one of Hector's nephews, which ended up with Tuco being killed by DEA agent Hank Schrader, who is also the brother-in-law of Walter White. This resulted in Tuco's cousins, Lionel and Marco Salamanca, wanting to kill Walter since they couldn't kill a DEA agent. But because Gus needed Walter, he gave them permission to kill Hank instead. However, when they went to do so, Gus called Hank 1 minute before with a disguised voice, telling him what was about to happen.
Shredder.
I need you to listen very carefully. 2 men are coming to kill you.
Come again?
They're approaching your car. You have 1 minute.
And I'll get the jag off. Who is this?
They're coming.
In doing so, Hank was on guard for the attack, managing to defend himself, killing Marco and hospitalizing Lionel. Gus then had to finish the job, and with Hank also being hospitalized from the attack, he saw a perfect opportunity. The DEA agents were keeping an eye on Lionel, but due to Gus's previous past helping out the DEA, he turned into his charming character and provided chicken to all the agents at the hospital. This caused everyone to go downstairs, drawing attention away from Lionel so Mike could slip in unseen to deliver a lethal injection and finish him off. Shortly after this reached the news, the Mexican cartel attacking a DEA agent, Juan Bolsa, was killed by federales. This could just be fortunate timing for Gus, or things went exactly how he planned. Either way, another one of his enemies perished. Now Hector Salamanca in a wheelchair had to suffer the loss of 4 of his nephews, with 3 of the deaths being related to Gus, and another longtime friend and business partner killed also. Gus's evil comes out as he doesn't hesitate to tell Hector that revenge is being served.
Marco was shot in the face and died instantly. Lionel lingered for several hours. Yesterday, the federales raided his hacienda, and in the confusion, Juan was shot dead. This is what comes of blood for blood, Hector. Sangre por sangre.
If you can't stand Gus's evil behavior, then you aren't alone, as Jesse Pinkman, the assistant of Walter White, despised him also.
They use kids. These assholes of yours that got an 11-year-old kid doing their killing for them. You're supposed to be some kind of reasonable businessman. This how you do business?
The 11-year-old that Jesse is referring to is Tomas Cantillo, who was used by Gus's dealers to murder a rival dealer named Combo. When Jesse confronted Gus about the morality of this, Gus agreed that they would no longer use kids. But instead of just telling Tomas that he could no longer work for them, Tomas was found dead, supposedly murdered by the same 2 dealers using him. It's not proven, but it's presumed that Gus ordered this, as his men likely wouldn't carry out a hit without his permission. If this is the case, then Gus truly has no empathy. If Tomas was only cut loose, he could snitch on the dealers, who could snitch on Gus, and he had to be in control of everything and not allow that as a possibility. Upon finding out, Jesse approaches the men to retaliate, but they are murdered by Walter White before he even gets there. Gus then realizes being in business with Walter is a double-edged sword. His product is an asset to the business that can't be lost, but his character is too volatile, especially when combined with Jesse. So Gus replaces Jesse with Gail Betecar as an assistant for Walt, but only for the reason of studying him, so the special meth can be produced without him, which would then mean Gus can kill him with no downside. See, when Gus is met with someone he can't control, he needs them gone. And that's exactly what he planned to do with Walter. But Walter outsmarts Gus. Realizing his plan, he gets an unwilling Jesse to murder Gail, meaning Gus now has no option other than to keep Walter alive if he wants the product to remain popular. However, Gus's henchman Victor had gone over to Gail's apartment in an attempt to stop Jesse, but arrived too late, and by stepping in the room and being sloppy, his face was noticed at the crime scene by witnesses. Mike and Victor then held Walter and Jesse back at the super lab waiting for Gus. When he eventually arrived, he puts on a lab suit and takes out a box cutter from the drawer. Walter pleads for his life, whilst Gus walks towards him, but instead, he turns and slits Victor's throat, staring menacingly at the others as he holds his dying body and the blood spills from his neck before dropping his corpse on the floor. Just like Tomas, any link back to Gus is a threat and gives him a lack of control which he needs in his life. The reason he chose to do it there and then was to show Walter and Jesse and perhaps Mike what ruthlessness he is capable of if things aren't done properly. If this is his reasoning, then he uses Victor to exact his Machiavellian leadership, which is characterized by interpersonal manipulation, indifference to morality, lack of empathy, and a strategic focus on self-interest. And one of the most popular quotes to come out of Machiavellian teachings is, "It's better to be feared than to be loved if one cannot be both." This was the case with Nacho, and now Gus is using it on his employees, as his lack of empathy allows him to kill ruthlessly, making fear easy to achieve. But trying to scare someone as volatile as Walter White may have been the wrong move for Gus. Gus is aware that Walter would be on edge and perhaps attempt to go against him, so he has to regain control of the situation. He attempts to do this by manipulating Jesse to get on his side instead of Walter's. He sends Jesse with Mike to money drops around the city. Jesse would wait in the car whilst Mike went inside to collect the money. But at one of the drops whilst Mike was inside, a man came out of a car holding a shotgun and approached the car that Jesse was in. And in a moment of quick thinking, Jesse reversed into the gunman causing him to fall, and rammed into the other car before escaping and later picking up Mike. A moment of being the hero in a completely spontaneous moment of danger. However, it wasn't. Gus had orchestrated the whole event.
Any injuries?
Twisted ankle. Nothing too bad. It all went like you thought it would. More or less. Anyway, just like you wanted. The kid's a hero.
Gus knew that whilst Jesse was working with Walter, praise and appreciation was hard to come by. Jesse was previously a drug addict, so Walter was hard on him, and therefore by creating this event and then praising Jesse for his acts, he could get Jesse on his side and perhaps cause a divide between the pair.
But you know what? I saved Mike from getting robbed. Even killed, maybe. So maybe I'm not such a loser after all.
What? This robbery that you stopped wasn't even real. I mean, think about it. Your first day out guarding Mike, he steps out for 1 second, and what happens? You immediately get robbed. Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. Gus can't kill you because of me. He knows I won't stand for it. He needs me, and he hates the fact that he needs me. So what does he do? He goes to work driving a wedge between you and me. How long did those guys chase you, huh? Because the way you describe it, they gave up pretty damn easy.
However, Gus is put under pressure when DEA agent Hank Schrader happened to connect dots between Gus and Gil Betica.
I mean, what do we know about Gustavo Fring, huh? This whole friend of law enforcement thing? Could be a case of keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. I mean, he's got the money to finance this operation. Maybe he's got the connections too. Maybe, just maybe, he's our guy.
However, when Gus was brought in by questioning by the DEA and APD for an interrogation, his ability to lie, charm, and manipulate persevered.
Your fingerprints were found at a crime scene, a drug-related homicide.
Gail Bedeker's apartment.
So you knew the victim.
15 years ago, I established a chemistry scholarship at UNM. I named it after Maximino Arciniega, a dear friend of mine who died too young. Gail was a recipient of this scholarship.
And you kept in regular contact with him over all this time?
Oh, no, I hadn't seen Gail for years, till I ran into him a few weeks ago. We caught up briefly. He invited me to dinner the following night, and I accepted. It was perhaps a week later I read about him in the paper. Drug-related, you said?
It's a good possibility.
His quality of pathological lying saves him here, because although some of this story may have had some factual element, the rest is a lie. Because Gus and Gail's relationship was to serve the development of Gus's criminal empire. The cartel had caught wind of this high-quality crystal meth and forced Gus to bring the mysterious Heisenberg to teach the cartel's chemists how it's done. In his plan to cut Walter out, Gus instead takes Jesse to Mexico, in the hopes that he can do a decent job at replicating since he'd been assisting Walter the whole time. And surprisingly, he does very well. Not only does this satisfy the cartel, but it makes Gus realize that if he can separate the two of them, then Walter can be killed. In celebration, the cartel bosses take Jesse, Gus, and Mike to Don Eladio's estate, and as a peace offering, Gus offers Eladio his favorite brand of tequila, and everyone bar Mike and Jesse take a shot.
Salud!
Salud! Gus excuses himself to the bathroom where he forces himself to be sick. Whilst outside, everyone begins to drop. Gus had poisoned the tequila, but taken a capsule beforehand to delay the effects on himself. He successfully kills at least 12 cartel members, and most importantly, kills Don Eladio, satisfying the 20-year wait for revenge.
All of them, Hector. Don Eladio, Don Paco, Cesar, Reynaldo, Fortuno, Cisco and Luis, Escalada, all dead. As is your grandson, Joaquin. And Joaquin, he was the only family you had left. Now, the Salamanca name dies with you.
Gus had regained control. He had found a new cook in Jesse, and he'd murdered the cartel who had a hold over him. But the more control he gained, the darker he became, and it came out as he fired Walter.
You are done. Fired. Stay away from Pinkman. In the meantime, there's the matter of your brother-in-law. Now it's left to me to deal with him. You can't. If you try to interfere, this becomes a much simpler matter. I will kill your wife. I will kill your son. I will kill your infant daughter.
When you think about the fact that Gus contributed to killing the whole of Hector's family, these threats to Walt definitely have a possibility of being genuine, but a threat so sinister can bring out desperation from a man like Walter White. Gus had heard that Hector had been speaking to the DEA. Of course, his assumption was that Hector had no family or cartel to associate with and could snitch just to pity Gus. Gus, upon hearing this, went to the retirement home with the plans to kill Hector with a lethal injection.
What kind of man talks to the DEA?
No man. No man at all.
A crippled little rata. What a reputation to leave behind. Is that how you want to be remembered?
However, Hector never did cooperate with the DEA in the first place. It was all staged. He was working with Walter White to kill Gus. And just as Gus goes to inject Hector, Hector rings the bell one last time. Gustavo Fring is killed in the explosion. Instantly, his empire starts to fall apart, and all his secrets become uncovered. Despite finally getting his revenge, he didn't get to live out his life as a free man. He'd remained a slave to his desire for revenge for 20 years. And just as he gets it, he's also met with the same fate of death. The one man Gus didn't defeat was Walter White. He could have killed him many times, but his greed to keep his empire on top was the only reason he didn't. And now, it all meant nothing. Only once being outed did people realize how cunning and manipulative he'd been the whole time, as the DEA boss stated.
I had him out to my house. The whole night we were laughing, telling stories, drinking wine, and he's somebody else completely. Right in front of me, right under my nose.
Although people might realize Gus's facade and manipulation, that may only be the tip of the iceberg. No one would know about Gus's torture of animals as a kid. No one will know Hector being in a wheelchair was Gus's doing. No one will know the tally of people Gus actually killed with violence, on top of the lives he ruined distributing crystal meth. A paranoid, sadistic, manipulative control freak who did so many evils to gain power and exact revenge. Many could blame his evil on the death of Max, but that was only on top of being an animal torturing meth distributor. Gustavo Fring was always dark.